Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Welcome, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Yehud in South Carolina, Bell in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Jonathan, Shalom from wet Southern California. Yeah, it's it's so crazy here. I haven't even listened to the news, but this must be one of those atmospheric rivers that comes across the Pacific and crashes into California, because it's just been raining like at a very, hard. It's been raining hard but steadily for a long time. I hope that the hillsides are not flooding, especially in those areas where the fires were. This could create huge problems, mudslides, and whatnot. I mean, it's good for our region, obviously, to get rain. I do wish that these coastal cities were better at capturing rain. So much of this rain just washes out to the ocean and doesn't get captured here in Los Angeles. That would be some good engineering and good practices that somehow have not been done. But thank you, God, for the rain, because we can always use it. And I'm sure that where it's hitting the mountains and then going to the reservoirs, that's fantastic for California. Guy in Ohio, Bill in mid-Missouri. Renee wishing everyone Hag Sameach. Today is Tu B'Shvat, birthday of the trees. And it's customary to eat the 7 species on this day, including figs and pomegranates and dates and olives. And I know I'm missing 3 others. But people do a Tu B'Shvat Seder, and they do that. So Chag Sameach. Tom in PA, Nancy, North Carolina, Carrie in Santa Clarita, where we shot the movie. Welcome, Carrie. Paul in the Great Northwest, Sharon in New Jersey, Lisa in WPA. I assume that means Western Pennsylvania. Welcome, Lisa. And Darlene, Am Yisrael Chai from New Jersey, Yosef in the Sierra Nevada, Ellen, Southern California, Alan, New York City, Debbie in New Jersey, Marjorie in Georgia, Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so this daf, our page is page 50, right? Daf Nun. Here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 7. And we've been talking about the order of the severity of the death penalties, right? There are 4 death penalties that are mentioned in the Torah, and our Mishnah lists them in order of severity. So that would be, I believe, stoning, burning, decapitation or killing by the sword, which is decapitation, and strangulation. We've talked a bunch of times. Stoning means getting thrown off a platform, and then if you don't die, a very heavy stone is dropped on you. Burning means having molten lead poured down your throat. Decapitation, okay, that's pretty obvious. A sword chops off your head. And strangulation is a scarf that gets tied around your neck and they pull it in 2 directions until you suffocate. But they're talking about the order in which these death penalties are mentioned to say that stoning is the most severe and strangulation is the least severe. Is it really because one is more painful than the other, one is less painful than the other? I mean, they're all pretty bad. It's the death penalty. But stoning will disfigure the corpse much more than a strangulation will. But also, it's which particular crimes are these death penalties associated with that has a bearing on whether we consider them more or less severe. Now, in the discussion that follows today, where they're going to keep sort of listing the different crimes and the different death penalties, sort of trying to gauge which is worse, which is which is more horrible, which is less horrible. If we get caught up in sort of trying to think about the emotion of a convicted killer who's going out to his execution, we're sort of gonna not really connect with what the sages are actually arguing about. Because what they're actually arguing about is they're using these cases of the different death penalties and the different crimes that they're associated with, really to derive logic and transitive properties so that we would know how to apply the law in which case. And because there's this multiplicity of possibilities, not 2 death penalties, but 4, not 4 types of crimes that result in a death penalty, but I don't know, 8 or 10 or something. And then sort of mixing and matching. Really what's going on here is they're using this area of the law for an extended logic analysis. The very simple case like we learned, in algebra, in middle school, this idea of, well, A is bigger than B, and B is bigger than C, so therefore A is bigger than C, right? Transitive property. And it's really that kind of logic, or you could almost imagine that they're saying, well, we have 4 kinds of garments, jeans, a suit, sweatpants, and leather pants, just 4 different types of garments. And you would have, wedding, business lunch, golf outing, road trip, and 4 kinds of events. So like if you had 4 outfits and 4 kinds of events, and then you were trying to figure out which outfit for which event, and if I use it on the first day, what am I going to have left on the second day? It's that kind of a logic puzzle. And so while we keep mentioning, the unfortunate case of the daughter of a priest who commits adultery, or a person who incites other members of his city to commit idolatry, and it results in the death penalty, the sages aren't going to the emotions of these dramatic stories of a terrible crime committed and the resulting death penalty with the whole nation looking on. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're really talking about today is mixing and matching penalties with crimes and trying to understand how to order them and how to match them and which is worse and which is better, or which is less worse, so that we could, in a case where it's not clear what the penalty should be, should we take the more severe or less severe case? That's all going to be dependent on understanding the logic and the linkages. Okay, that's the best I can explain it. Okay, we picked this up at the top of 50a. Stoning is considered more severe than decapitation by the sword. Why? Because it is meted out to one who blasphemes and to one who worships idols. And for what reason is the severity of these transgressions considered greater than the others? Well, as we said earlier, it is because the transgressors undermine the fundamental tenets of Judaism. So the Gemara objects. On the contrary, decapitation by the sword would appear to be more severe than stoning, as it is meted out to the people of an idolatrous city, who also undermine the fundamental tenets of Judaism. And for what reason is the severity of this case of a whole city that has become idolatrous considered greater than others? Because the transgressors are not only executed, but their property is destroyed as well. So the Gemara answers this challenge. You should say that in response to this objection, you should say the severity of which transgression is greater? The severity of the transgression of the one who subverts the city, meaning incites other people to sin, or the severity of the transgression of the subverted, the people who are incited to sin? Well, you must say that the severity of the people who incite others to sin is worse than the ones who are incited, the ones who succumb to the temptation, right? Their crime is not as wicked as the crime of people who, seduce and subvert others to come commit crimes. Of course, that's worse. You must say the severity of the subverter is greater. And it is taught in a Baraisa, the subverters, the ones who cause a city to become idolatrous, they are executed by stoning. So evidently, stoning is a more severe type of execution than decapitation. That's a full proof, right? If in a city that becomes idolatrous, where everyone is committing idolatry, so the whole city stands to be executed and all their property needs to be destroyed, it's not going to be, given to the poor or anything, because it was a city that became idolatrous, all their possessions are also destroyed. But among those people, the ones who incite others to commit idolatry, they are stoned, and the rest of the members of the city are beheaded. So clearly stoning is worse than decapitation by the sword. Stoning is considered more severe than strangulation, as it is meted out to one who blasphemes and to one who worships idols. And for what reason is the severity of these transgressions considered greater? As we said, because it subverts the very tenets of Judaism. Gemara objects. On the contrary, strangulation is worse than stoning, because strangulation is meted out to one who wounds his father or his mother. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? Because the obligation to honor one's parents is compared to the honor of the Omnipresent, right? The honor of God. When you honor your parents, you are honoring God. Your parents are compared to God in the sense you have an obligation to give honor to God, and you have an obligation to give honor to the ones who partnered with God to create you, namely your parents, right? And so that is a very severe crime to violate the fifth commandment, right? The fifth commandment is honor your parents. So the Gemara answers, since the merciful one singles out the case, and by the way, the 10 commandments, right, are divided into 2 tablets, 5 and 5, where the first 5 are like, I'm the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me, you shall keep the Shabbos because I created the world in 6 days, etc. The first tablet are the commandments between man and God. The second tablet, you shall not murder, you shall not, bear false witness, you shall not steal, etc. Those are the commandments that modulate behavior between people and other people. Where is honor your parents? On the first tablet with the commandments that modulate between a person and God. So that's why honoring your parents is considered, such an elevated and important commandment. So violating it would seem to be as bad or worse than blasphemy is the argument that's being made here. And so the Gemara answers this argument by saying, since the merciful one singles out the case of a betrothed Jewish woman from the category of a married Jewish woman, right? So we're going to talk about adultery, but marriage, right, in Judaism comes in 2 stages. First betrothal, and then the chuppah, and then the full marriage. And as we've talked about in the past, betrothal is not like an engagement. Right? If people get engaged in our culture and then they break off the engagement, okay, well, they were never married. They can go their separate ways. They have no further obligations to each other. But in Judaism, under Torah law, if a man and woman are betrothed and they want to break off the betrothal, then that requires a get. That requires a bill of divorce. Nevertheless, they haven't consummated the union. They're just betrothed to each other. So if she sleeps with another man while she's betrothed, that's considered a less severe crime than when she is married, right? Married, it would be a bigger betrayal of the relationship if she commits adultery when they're fully married than when they are betrothed. So, since the merciful one singles out the case of a betrothed Jewish woman from the category of a married Jewish woman, changing the punishment of a betrothed Jewish woman who committed adultery from strangulation to stoning, conclude from this that stoning is worse. And burning is considered more severe than decapitation by the sword, as it is meted out to a priest's daughter who committed adultery. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater than others? Because she profanes both herself and her father. The Gemara objects. On the contrary, decapitation by the sword is more severe, as it is meted out to the people of an idolatrous city. And for what reason is the severity of this case considered greater? Because the transgressors are not only executed, but their property is destroyed as well. We'll keep going back to the same set of reasons to get the same logic. Again, we're lining up penalties and crimes really just to compare them with each other. They could be like, outfits and events. It could be, widgets and tool chests. I mean, whatever. It's more of the logic problem than actually right now getting into the emotional baggage or background of these crimes and punishments. The severity of burning is derived by means of not whether we burn or not, but how the severity of burning, right, in this list where that orders the death penalties in terms of severity. So this is derived by means of a verbal analogy. The term her father is stated with regard to stoning in the verse, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones, and she shall die because she has done a depraved thing in Israel, to play the harlot in the house of her father. Deuteronomy 22:21. And the term her father is stated with regard to burning. So in the verse, and the daughter of a priest, when she profanes herself by playing the harlot, she profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. In Leviticus 21:9. Therefore, just as concerning the term her father that is stated with regard to stoning, it is established that stoning is more severe than decapitation by the sword, so too concerning the term her father that is stated with regard to burning, it may be established that burning is more severe than decapitation by the sword. Burning is considered more severe than strangulation, as it is meted out to a priest's daughter who committed adultery. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? As we said, because she profanes both herself and her father. The Gemara objects. On the contrary, strangulation is more severe, as it is meted out to one who wounds his father or his mother. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? Because the honor of one's parents is compared to the honor of the Omnipresent. Now the Gemara answers the objection. Since the Merciful One singles out the case of a married daughter of a priest from the category of a married Jewish woman, changing the punishment of the married daughter of a priest who committed adultery from strangulation to burning, conclude from it that burning is more severe than strangulation. Decapitation by the sword is considered more severe than strangulation, as it is meted out to the people of an idolatrous city. And for what reason is the severity of this case considered greater? Because not only are they executed, but their property is destroyed as well. The Gemara objects. On the contrary, strangulation is more severe, as it is meted out to one who wounds his father or his mother. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? Because the honor of one's parents is compared to the honor of the Omnipresent. And the Gemara answers, nevertheless, the transgression of one who undermines the fundamental tenets of Judaism is more severe, as he defiles the honor of the Omnipresent himself, not to parents who are compared to the Omnipresent, but the Omnipresent himself. And so this punishment must certainly be the most severe. Our Mishnah taught that Rabbi Shimon disagreed, right? The majority said, in order of severity, from most severe to least severe, stoning, burning, decapitation by the sword, and then strangulation. Rabbi Shimon had a different order. He said the most severe is burning, then stoning, then strangulation, and then decapitation by the sword. Okay, what is Rabbi Shimon's reason? The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Shimon says that the order of severity is burning, stoning, strangulation, and killing by the sword. The Gemara explains the basis of his opinion. Burning is considered more severe than stoning, as burning is meted out to a priest's daughter who committed adultery. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater than the others? Because she profanes both herself and her father. The Gemara raises an objection. On the contrary, stoning is more severe, as it is meted out to the one who blasphemes and to one who worships idols. And for what reason is the severity of these transgressions greater? Because the transgressor undermines the fundamental tenets of Judaism. And the Gemara answers this objection. Rabbi Shimon conforms to his line of reasoning, as he says that the daughter of a priest, whether she is betrothed or married, is singled out for burning. And since the Merciful One singles out the case of the betrothed daughter of a priest from the category of betrothed Jewish women generally, changing her punishment from execution by stoning to execution by burning because she's a priest's daughter, conclude from it that burning is more severe than stoning, as the punishment for a priest's daughter who committed adultery must certainly be more severe than for the daughter of a non-priest. And the Gemara continues to explain the order of severity according to Rabbi Shimon, the minority opinion, but we're going to analyze it just as carefully. Burning is considered more severe than strangulation, as it is meted out to a priest's daughter who committed adultery. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? As we said, it is because she profanes both herself and her father. The Gemara objects. On the contrary, strangulation is more severe, as it is meted out to one who wounds his father or his mother. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? Because the honor of one's parent is compared to the honor of the Omnipresent. And the Gemara answers the objection, since the Merciful One singles out the case of the married daughter of a priest who committed adultery from the category of married Jewish women who committed adultery, changing her punishment from execution by strangulation to execution by burning, conclude from it that burning is more severe than strangulation. Burning is considered more severe than decapitation by the sword, as it is meted out to a priest's daughter who committed adultery. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? As we said, because she profanes both herself and her father. Now the Gemara objects. On the contrary, decapitation by the sword is more severe, as it is meted out to the people of an idolatrous city. And why would we consider that more severe? Because not only are they executed, but also their property is destroyed. And the Gemara answers, in response to this objection, you should say, but the severity of which transgression is greater? The severity of the transgression of the one who subverts the city and incites others to idolatry, or the ones who are subverted, the ones who are incited to commit that crime? You must say that the sin of the ones who subvert the others is the more severe sin, and since their punishment is stoning, it is obvious that stoning is a more severe type of capital punishment than decapitation by the sword. And it is inferred, kal v'chomer, that if it is so, that concerning strangulation, which is more severe than decapitation by the sword, nevertheless burning is more severe than it, is it not all the more so obvious that burning is more severe than decapitation by the sword, which is a more lenient type of execution when compared to strangulation? Stoning is considered more severe than strangulation, as it is meted out to one who blasphemes and to one who worships idols. And for what reason is the severity of these transgressions considered greater? As we said, because this transgression undermines the fundamental tenets of Judaism. The Gemara objects. On the contrary, strangulation is more severe, as it is meted out to one who wounds his father or his mother. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? Because the honor of one's parents is compared to the honor of the Omnipresent. And the Gemara answers the challenge, since the Merciful One singles out the case of the betrothed daughter of a non-priest who committed adultery from the category of married Jewish women generally, who committed adultery, changing her punishment from execution by strangulation to execution by stoning, conclude from it that stoning is more severe. Stoning is considered more severe than decapitation by the sword, as it is meted out to one who blasphemes and to one who worships idols. The Gemara raises an objection. On the contrary, decapitation by the sword is more severe, as it is meted out to the people of an idolatrous city. And for what reason is this considered more severe? Because when the people of an idolatrous city are executed, their property is also destroyed. And the Gemara answers in response to this objection that you should say, but the severity of which transgression is greater, the severity of the subverter or the severity of the transgression of the ones who are subverted. You must say that the sin of those who subvert others to idolatry is worse than the ones who are subverted. And since they are punished by stoning, it is obvious that stoning is worse. then decapitation. And then we infer, Kal Vachomer, that if it is so, that strangulation, which is more severe than decapitation by the sword, nevertheless, stoning is more severe than it. Is it not all the more so obvious that stoning is more severe than decapitation by the sword, which is more lenient compared to strangulation? Strangulation is more severe than decapitation by the sword, as it is meted out to one who wounds his father or his mother. And for what reason is the severity of this transgression considered greater? As we said, because the honor of one's parents is compared to the honor of the Omnipresent. The Gemara objects, on the contrary, decapitation by the sword is more severe, as it is meted out to the people of an idolatrous city. And for what reason is the severity of the transgression greater? Because their property is destroyed. The Gemara says that you should say in response, but the severity of which transgression is greater, the subverter or the subverted? You must say the transgression of the subverter is greater. And therefore, the subverter is greater, and it is taught in a Baraisa, the subverters of an idolatrous city are executed by stoning. Rabbi Shimon says the subverters are executed by strangulation. Therefore, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, it is clear that strangulation is a more severe type of capital punishment than decapitation, but we don't follow Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan was wont to say the following Baraisa: a betrothed young woman who is the daughter of a priest and who committed adultery is executed by stoning. Rabbi Shimon says she is executed by burning. A betrothed young woman who is the daughter of a non-priest who engaged in intercourse with her father, right, incest, is executed by stoning. Rabbi Shimon says by burning, right? Because now there's two penalties that are applied. She committed incest and she committed adultery. So which death penalty is she going to get if these are different death penalties? The Gemara asks, what does this Baraisa teach us? The Gemara answers, it teaches us that according to the opinion of the rabbis, the married daughter of a priest is singled out for burning and not a betrothed one who is executed by stoning. According to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the daughter of a priest, whether she is betrothed or married, because she's the daughter of a priest, if she commits adultery, she's singled out for burning. And what is the reason for their respective opinions with regard to the punishment of the daughter of a priest? It is because, according to the rabbis, stoning is more severe than burning. Whereas, according to Rabbi Shimon, burning is more severe. If a person commits a crime that has two crimes in it, right? Obviously, it's a hypothetical. But if, this married woman sleeps with her father, okay, so she committed both incest, that's a death penalty offense, and adultery. Now, she's liable to the death penalty for two different crimes arising from the same action. Which death penalty does she get? Obviously, she can only be executed once. So in a case where the same crime can result in two different death penalties because there are two crimes being committed simultaneously, the perpetrator is punished with the more severe death penalty. Since Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis disagree on which death penalty is more severe, the practical outcome is that when two death penalties apply, according to the majority, it'll be, let's say, stoning, and according to Rabbi Shimon, it will be burning. That's what we're talking about here. In addition to the case of the priest's daughter who committed adultery, there is a practical difference between these two opinions, which is that one who was sentenced to two different court-imposed death penalties for two sins that he committed is punished with the more severe of the two. And these Tanaim disagree as to which type of death penalty is more severe. What is the source of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that a priest's betrothed daughter who committed adultery is executed by stoning? As it is taught in Baraisa, Rabbi Shimon says two general laws are stated in the Torah with regard to the daughter of a priest. One, rendering the betrothed daughter of a priest who committed adultery liable to be executed by stoning. And the other law mentioned in the Torah renders the married daughter of a priest who committed adultery to be liable to be executed by strangulation. So the Gemara interrupts the Baraisa and asks, are they stated only with regard to the daughter of a priest and not with regard to the daughter of a non-priest? Aren't these laws stated with regard to the daughter of a non-priest as well? So rather amend the text and say, these two laws are stated with regard to the daughter of a priest as well. And the Baraisa continues, the verse, and the daughter of a priest, when she profanes herself by playing the harlot, she profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. Leviticus 21:9. This is stated with regard to both a betrothed woman and a married woman. And the verse thereby singles out the married daughter of a priest from the category of an ordinary married woman whose punishment is execution by strangulation. And it singles out the betrothed daughter of a priest from the category of ordinary betrothed women who is executed by stoning. Therefore, just as when the verse singles out the married daughter of a priest from the category of a married woman, it is to render her punishment more severe, so too, when the verse singles out the betrothed daughter of a priest from the category of a betrothed woman, it is to render her punishment more severe. And this indicates that burning is a more severe type of capital punishment than stoning. The punishment for the conspiring witnesses, okay, now I'm getting to a new crime at last. The conspiring witnesses, right, witnesses who lie in a death penalty case, and then it's proven that they're lying because where they claim to be and when they claim to be there, in order to witness the crime for which now the defendant is going to be executed, turns out that these witnesses were seen somewhere else at that time, and therefore they couldn't have seen the crime, and they must be liars who are conspiring to have the defendant in this capital case executed. And once this is proven, now the witnesses, the conspiring witnesses, become liable to be executed. Since they were conspiring in a death penalty case, they get the same penalty that the defendant would have gotten if their conspiracy had not been exposed. So now they are liable to the death penalty. So now what? The punishment for the conspiring witnesses concerning the married daughter of a priest who testified falsely that she committed adultery is included in the punishment for the conspiring witnesses concerning the married daughter of a non-priest. And the punishment for the conspiring witnesses concerning the betrothed daughter of a priest is included in the punishment for the conspiring witnesses concerning the betrothed daughter of a non-priest. The Torah is not more severe with them. The conspiring witnesses in the case of any married woman accused of committing adultery, they are strangled. And the conspiring witnesses in the case of any betrothed woman accused of committing adultery, they are stoned. The sages taught, the verse states, quote, and the daughter of a priest, this is written Ish Kohen, when she profanes herself by playing the harlot, she profanes her father. She shall be burned with fire. One might have thought that the expression when she profanes, ki techel, is referring even to one who desecrated Shabbos, chilela, similar root. She too should be executed by burning. To counter this, the verse states, by playing the harlot. The verse is speaking of profanation through promiscuity. One might have thought that even if she is unmarried and she engaged in promiscuous intercourse, she should be executed by burning. This is not correct, as here it is stated her father, and there it is stated with regard to a betrothed woman who committed adultery. Because she has done a depraved thing in Israel to play the harlot in the house of her father, because she's betrothed, she still lives in her father's house, she's not married and living in her husband's house. So just as there the reference is to the promiscuous intercourse of one who has a bond to the husband, so too here the reference is to the promiscuous intercourse of one who has a bond to a husband, not a single woman who's neither betrothed nor married. She is not, if a woman has premarital sex, that's not a death penalty offense. Only one who is betrothed or married. Or perhaps one might have thought that the verse states her father only to exclude all men except her father, i.e. she is liable to be executed by burning only if she engaged in intercourse with her father. To counter this faulty logic, when it states she profanes, indicating that it is she who profanes her father and not her father who profanes himself and her, all men are therefore included. Therefore, how do I realize the meaning of the expression she profanes her father? What law does this teach? So the Baraisa answers, here it is stated her father, and there it is stated her father. Just as there the reference is to the promiscuous intercourse of one who has a bond to a husband, so too here the reference is to the promiscuous intercourse of one who has a bond to a husband. The Baraisa asks, if the law of the priest's daughter who committed adultery is compared by means of a verbal analogy to the law of a betrothed woman who committed adultery, then perhaps that one should say that just as there, the reference is specifically to a young woman, i.e., to one whose first signs of maturity appeared within the past half year, who is betrothed, so too, here in the case of the daughter of a priest, the reference is to a young woman who is betrothed. But if she is a young woman who is married, or a grown woman who is betrothed, or a grown woman who is married, or even if she grew old, and is not normally referred to as a daughter, from where is it derived that her punishment is execution by burning? The verse states, and the daughter of a priest. In any case, it is derived from the conjunction and, represented by the letter vav, that this punishment applies to any woman who is the daughter of a priest. And the verse states, the daughter of a priest. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. We're at the top of 51a. I have a source only for the case of a priest's daughter who married a priest. From where do I derive that she is also liable to be executed by burning if she married a Levite or an Israelite, a Samaritan, a priest disqualified due to flawed lineage known as a halal, a son born from an incestuous or adulterous relationship known as a mamzer, or even a Gibeonite? The verse states, and the daughter of a priest, indicating that this law applies even if she is not now a priestess, having married a non-priest. It is derived from the verse, she shall be burned with fire, that she is executed by burning. But her paramour is not executed by burning. His punishment is the same as that of one who engages in adulterous intercourse with the betrothed or married daughter of a non-priest. It is further derived from the word she, that she is executed by burning, but witnesses who testified concerning her that she committed adultery and who were proven to be conspiring witnesses, they are not executed by burning, rather a different penalty. And the Baraisa concludes, Rabbi Eliezer says, if she is with her father, she is executed by burning. And if she is with her father-in-law, she is executed by stoning, as the Gemara will explain below. Okay. It's not easy, but as you can see what I'm saying, it was more of a logic puzzle. Comparative penalties and comparative crimes. And since the Torah didn't spell out exactly the order in every case of the penalties and exactly the order of severity in every case of the crimes, by sort of understanding how they compare to each other, the sages are using logic, extending it all the way to say, okay, well, in the cases where the Torah didn't specify what the death penalty would be, what are we going to say the death penalty is? Not because any of these death penalties have been carried out by a rabbinic court probably in 2,000 years, but just so we understand the law. Joseph. Deductive and inductive reasoning, like mathematics, Pythagorean theorem, it's not rhetoric. Just so. Lucy. Can a betrothed woman initiate or demand a get? Refuse a marriage if she is betrothed. I remember an underage girl can when she becomes of age. Exactly right. Very good. That's a good question. I don't think... she can initiate the sequence of events that will lead to her husband giving her a get, but is definitely a patriarchal system, right? Where she can't give the get. She can't create the get. The husband has to give the get, even in a case of betrothal. I guess maybe the difference is, exactly, in the underage case, she has more power when she comes of age because she didn't agree to the betrothal. Her father did it for her. An adult woman agreed to the betrothal. And that's now she's in that same state as if it was fully married, where if she wanted to break it off, she could say, I refuse to marry you. But she's not going to be free to marry another man until she gets the get from the guy to whom she was betrothed. Yosef, I've heard those who say all the laws in the Torah are equally severe. These laws show levels of offense towards God and man on a tiered list rather than a flat approach. Right. I mean, the whole discussion here is which is more severe than others. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you're saying that all the laws are severe. I wouldn't say that all the laws are severe. I would actually say that all the laws are loving, right? It's hard to understand when we're hearing something that sounds so archaic and, somebody who committed adultery is going to be executed. That's just very different than our culture, for sure. But it made sense. It made sense in that culture. It made sense. Where we do say that what I've heard said is that we can't say that one mitzvah is more important than another. Not about severity, but about importance, right? We don't know the relative values of mitzvahs. We can't understand. It seems to us, that honoring your parents is, would seem to be more important, than waving the lulav at Sukkot, right? You might have thought, because we have a much more emotional and relational connection with the mitzvah of honoring one's parents than we might have had, with the obligation, which is a huk, right? It's a super rational law. We can't really understand the reason for it. It's not like we understand that a society needs to outlaw murder and false testimony and adultery and all kinds of things just so that it functions as a society. But a society could function without people waving a lulav at Sukkot. However, since God created the world and we don't understand the backstage workings of the world, not remotely, that's why we have to be humble and say, we can't assess the relative merits and compare one mitzvah to another. But in terms of severity of crime or severity of transgression, which we're making, we're making some logical leaps here and saying, well, you have to say that the sin of the subverter is more wicked, right? Is a more severe sin than the sin of the subverted. That just seems so logically reasonable. But in terms of like the pain involved, that's not the reason for saying that stoning is worse than strangulation. They're saying stoning is worse than strangulation because it's associated with a crime that we could objectively say, is a more severe transgression. But really, the reason we're making these comparisons is so that we'll know which penalty to apply when the Torah is not explicit. Darlene, if the woman is going to be punished, well, excuse me, what about the man? The man is punished. We're just talking about that the Torah singles out what the punishment is. But in the case of adultery, absolutely. Both of them receive the death penalty. But what we're learning out is that because there are different death penalties, for these different crimes, and that there's a different death penalty for a betrothed woman than for a married woman, that we can, learn out some information there. It's not that the man gets off. Absolutely not. The adulterer is also subject to the death penalty. Again, since I see that Nina's mentioning you're new, the death penalty in a rabbinic court, I don't think has been meted out, in 2,000 years. And even then, if it was meted out more than once in 70 years, it was considered a murderous court. Very much, there's so much in the rules of criminal and civil procedure to make sure that a court doesn't execute unless the person was warned that, well, if you do this, you'll be liable to the death penalty. And then they do it immediately after the warning, and both the warning and the crime were in front of two witnesses, and still the court couldn't find some other way to, take execution off the table. This is much more about understanding which penalties are associated with which crimes than the emotional, reckoning of, oh my God, what was it really like when they made this happen? It happens so rarely. Michelle, I had a third cousin on my mother's side who, upon his capture by the Japanese in World War II, was given an honorable execution. He fought with bravery. He was executed by decapitation. Right, interesting. So that was considered an honorable death. So sad. And, may his memory always be for a blessing. War is terrible. And finally, Joseph does, when you say it violates the fundamental tenets of Judaism, does this mean the Shema? No, I don't think that's what they're saying. What they're saying, the fundamental tenet of Judaism is that God created the world and God has certain demands from us. Number one, that we acknowledge God and thank him for creating the world and creating us, and that we direct our prayers to him, and that we don't, make up other gods and worship them, whether it's the sun and stars, or weather patterns, or statues that we build, etc. Right? The fundamental tenet of Judaism is that in a world where people were worshiping, pantheons, many pantheons full of gods, Abraham came and said, "This is all nonsense. There's one God who created the world." And so being in relationship with the one God, that's the fundamental tenet of Judaism. And, an idolatrous city, a city where the whole city turned its back. Now, this is not just, this only applies to a Jewish city in Israel, where all the Jews turned their back on God and all the gifts that we're constantly receiving from God and said they were going to worship statues. That violates the fundamental tenets of Judaism, and that's why it's considered a very severe crime. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday winter time of 11:30 a.m. Pacific. Have a good night.